Stork'd family, welcome to Stork'd, the podcast in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. It is such a pleasure to have Laney on the podcast today. Laney is here to talk about her experiences as a transracial and transnational adoptee. In addition, she has a really interesting story about trying to find her biological family and trying to have that moment of reunification. As some of you may know, I had been and have been thinking about adopting and had even explored adopting from another country. Specifically, this journey for me about building a podcast was generated from a trip I took to Colombia. And I shared that experience in season 1, episode 1, and had the privilege of getting to know an incredible woman named Laney through that process. And Laney reached out to me and said, I think you're thinking about adoption with your own lens, with your own hat on, but let me make sure that you're really centering understanding of adoption around the child or the person who is being adopted, because that's the more important perspective. And I will eternally be grateful to Laney for reframing or reshaping the way I was thinking about adoption. And what we're going to hear today in this episode is Laney's very deep and meaningful exploration of cultural identity and self-identity. Laney really does a deep dive into who she is at her core, as well as what it means to be Chinese national and adopted into an American family. And so I really am grateful for the perspective she's going to share today. She's bringing voice to the experience of having been adopted that a lot of people, I think, don't hear or may not be aware of. In fact, she has a leadership role in supporting other people who are adopted from China. And I love this story. There's so much richness and depth and texture to it. I hope you love it as much as I do. If you do love it, please share the episode or Stork'd in general. And here is Laney. Laney, thank you so much for joining Stork'd. I'm really thrilled to have you here on the podcast. As you know, we talk about the many ways to build family. And Laney and I built a relationship over Instagram when you pointed out some of the ways in which my first episode could have been a little bit more sensitive to people who are adopted in the way that I was using language choices. And that has sparked some really interesting ongoing dialogue. So first, I want to thank you for the bravery to reach out to a stranger and say, hey, let me offer you this piece of feedback, and then to have the ongoing conversation. And then I'd also like to welcome you here because I'm really excited to hear your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really great having chatted with you, and listening to your episodes were really, really interesting. So yeah, thank you for offering to have me here and share my perspective.
We're going to have fun, I think. So let's start at the beginning. Can you give a little intro about yourself and what your family composition currently looks like?
Yes. Okay. So hi, everyone. I'm Laney. I am a Chinese adoptee, so a transracial and transnational adoptee. That means that I was adopted from China into the United States. So that's the transnational part. I'm adopted from one country into another. And transracial means that I was adopted by someone who belongs to a different race than I do. So I am Chinese, I'm Asian, and my adoptive mom is white. And I was adopted by a single mother and raised in Dallas, Texas. And that is my nuclear family.
That's your nuclear family. Okay.
Right.
So what is your extended family? How do you define family more broadly?
Right. So I do have chosen family too, and I have a godmother who is also a single mother and her daughter, and we were raised very close. So when I was little, I thought we were sisters, even though she's white and everything, but we do vacations and everything like that. She's 3 years older than me, but my extended family, my mom is just her side.
I love what you just described as almost like a blended family where you've got two different parents and two different parent-child relationships, but you're really coming together as a unit for vacations and other moments together.
Right. That was very interesting because we were raised like sisters to some extent. And her mother has been like a second mom to me in terms of child rearing. I spent a lot of time at her place, sleepovers, and same with Logan, my god sister, staying at my place too. But we weren't biological sisters, and she's a donor baby, which was also very interesting. Yeah, it's just because I know there are adoptees who have siblings who are biological children to their adoptive parents. And I've just been thinking about that and talking to some other adoptees about their experience when it comes to genetic mirroring and how that really impacted them. And my god sister looks a lot like her mom.
What does genetic mirroring mean? Okay, that's a new term for me.
Right. So genetic mirroring, my understanding of it is basically you are biologically related to someone and therefore you should have similar physical traits, like your facial features, your height, your whatever related to your physical body. So I did not have genetic mirroring growing up. There's genetic mirroring and then there's racial mirroring, which is in terms of having people belonging to the same race as you and like being able to see them and
see yourself in them.
And see yourself in them to some extent. So all adoptees, unless you're adopted within family, all adoptees who are adopted by biological strangers do not have genetic mirroring. So sometimes same race adoptees have shared similar struggles as transracial adoptees when it comes to a lack of genetic mirroring and just feeling like a stranger or struggling to feel like you belong within your family because you do not have that connection. So you take pictures with your family and you're the odd man out or odd person out. Yeah. And that's a real struggle. So I thought that was interesting in terms of my godmother and my god sister. And she asked me, because she's been reading some of my social media stuff, and asked if that was difficult for me.
So what was your experience growing up? You talk about in your social media, your self-identity as an adoptee seems to be really central to the way in which you communicate online. Was it always that way? Was it a huge component of your self-identity as a child?
So when I was a kid, I did not connect with my heritage. So my mom had attempted to introduce Chinese culture and take me to events and stuff, but I just wasn't interested. And so she didn't push it, which I actually appreciate because you can't make a little kid do something they don't want. My identity, I've always known I'm Chinese. I've always known I'm adopted. I see my mom, I see myself. It's there was no way in hiding that. But I never really connected fully to my Chinese identity. And I still struggle with that in terms of having to remind myself that I'm Chinese. It's a racial dissociation.
Yeah.
Because I see myself as me, as Laney, but I don't see myself as a Chinese person unless I constantly remind myself that I am.
So you're not walking around wearing this mantle of I am Chinese. It's one of those things that sort of pops up in your head on occasion.
Well, I told my friend a few years ago that sometimes I have to look at myself in the mirror to remember. Even though on an intellectual level, I have always known I'm Chinese. And it's not something I'm ashamed of or hate about myself. I really do love Chinese culture and Chinese people and everything like that. But it's just, I've never had that connection. And so it's very hard for me to feel like I belong. And to feel like I can fully claim that. And there are certain aspects of being a transracial adoptee that prevent me from fully claiming and feeling like it's okay. Cultural reclamation is what I'm talking about. So one aspect of cultural reclamation for me would be just being around Asian people who are raised by their biological parents. So I know a bunch of Chinese adoptees. And I know a bunch of Asian adoptees, and it's great being around them. But I have difficulty being in large groups of Asian people, Asian Americans specifically, raised by their parents.
And that's because you don't feel that sense of belonging? You don't feel like that identity is yours to claim?
So intellectually, I know I have a right to claim whatever identity I want, and my identity is intersectional. But I feel like a racial imposter sometimes. I didn't grow up eating authentic Chinese food. I didn't grow up celebrating Chinese holidays and festivals. So I think it's really hard for me to connect with people. And then when I hear them talking about that, or talking about their family and celebrating those events, I just realize what I missed out on.
So you're feeling this a sense of loss of identity or culture?
Yes, definitely. There is pain in knowing and reclaiming what is my birthright, realizing the entire life that I could have lived and didn't live.
I think that's a really interesting statement you just made, claiming your birthright. When did you start paying attention to this sense of loss, and when did you start the reclamation process?
Yeah. So I was 15 when I really, it was honestly like a bus hit me because I didn't talk about my adoption when I was little. Stuff would come up, like there would be a random adoption theme in like a TV show or movie we were watching. And like my mom would be like, do you want to talk about it? And I'd say no. So I'd push it away and I didn't want to talk about it.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
When you saw those TV shows, did you recognize your personal experience in the characters you were witnessing? Or was it sort of just like, that's the story, this is my life, and I'm not connecting to it?
I didn't connect because it wasn't an Asian mother giving away her child. So it was typically a white mother, and it was like an unwed mother, a teen mom, but it was still a mother giving away her child. So I couldn't fully connect to that. And I just didn't want to think about my birth parents. But at 15 is when I first dealt with my adoption because we were watching a film in geography class about the one-child policy. So I've always known about the one-child policy and I've always known about gender preference. But I didn't really think hard about that. I didn't let it sink in. And then after watching that film, we are leaving class and one of my classmates, a boy, said to me, did you realize if you'd been born a boy, you'd still be in China?
Oh my God.
And that was the first time I realized I had siblings. Like I didn't think about the fact that I had siblings that my biological parents kept, and that really hurt. And then I sort of spiraled. There was a lot of anger, a lot of guilt, and a lot of grief in terms of the fact, and guilt in terms of the fact that it took me 15 years to think about my parents.
15, that's like a lot to hold. And it's a lot that somebody unfairly, one of your class peers unfairly put on you.
Yeah, that was really difficult. I mean, I wrote my college essay on it and I got into schools, but that was really painful to hear. And since doing a lot of research and since birth parent searching, I've learned that a lot of families actually kept their first daughters. A lot of poor families, there were some allowances with the one-child policy that poor people in rural areas could drag in for a son. And so they just kept trying. So I realized that I have at least one older sister.
Oh.
And so all the families I met had given birth to 3 children and given away their middle daughter. So oddly find comfort in terms of the gendered aspect in the fact that they kept my older sister.
Tell me a little bit about the comfort that you found in the older sister.
I found comfort in the fact that I wasn't given up purely based on my birth sex, because that's really tough. An ideal Chinese family, it's like a boy and a girl. That's the perfect balance. And so there's a lot of assumption that people in China just hate women, but there's so much more to understanding the culture and why there is gendered preference. And let's be honest, in Western culture, there is that too. The patriarchy is everywhere.
That's true.
So I just found comfort in knowing that I probably wasn't the firstborn, but just had the misfortune of not being firstborn.
It's an interesting reframing from, you used a very strong word, you used gender hatred to misfortune. That's a huge internal shift. Tell us about where you are currently in your reflection around your self-identity. That's a really hard question. That was an unfair question. Sorry.
I mean, I'm just going to, the adoption journey is continuous. And
let's do that. Let's talk about the adoption journey, because that was a not fair question.
No. So when I was 15, 16, I dealt a lot with my identity and struggling with the fact that I'm not supposed to be here. I was not born to be an American. I was not born to have been raised by a white American. That wasn't who I was supposed to be. The 2 biggest, I guess 3 biggest life events were not my decision. So I had no say in being given up, and I had no say in my adoption. And of course, I had no say in who adopted me, because I lived in an orphanage for a while. So there was that middle period where I was in an orphanage, and then I was adopted by an American. And I think in terms of identity, I struggled with the fact that, or sometimes I still struggle with the fact that I'm not the person I was supposed to be. And I can do as much cultural reclamation as I want, and then cultural healing, racial healing, but that will not give me the life that I had taken away, which I know sounds very harsh, but I wasn't supposed to be here. People are naturally born to their parents and they're raised by their parents. but I didn't get that opportunity. And that's why I personally use relinquishment over abandonment, because I don't think they abandoned me, because the term abandonment for me assumes that there's a disregard or that they didn't care. So yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around, and it's an ongoing process for me to constantly reevaluate my understanding of my adoptive circumstances and then how it has impacted and will continue to impact my life.
Yeah, it's a lot to grapple with, and it's some really heavy concepts that you've shared with us. So thank you. I honor you sharing that with us and really appreciate it. It sounds like in your process of sitting and reflecting on who you are and who you were supposed to be in this disconnect, it sounds like you've taken some steps to do research, to learn more about your culture, to learn potentially more about your biological parents. What are some of those steps you've taken? It sounds to me almost like you've had more resources available to you than some might. So if somebody else were interested in pursuing a similar journey, what might they consider?
As an adoptee, I'll just say, like, you don't have to reclaim culture if you don't want. It's really individual. If you are interested, just know that your identity and you as a person, like wherever you're from, like your birth country or your birth culture, you're valid. So like no one else can tell you whether or not you're, like in my case, no one can tell me whether or not I'm Chinese enough. So like I get to decide that. So in high school, I did a lot of like reading books. I really enjoy historical fiction. So I did a lot of early research about China through just like historical fiction, which was really fun. And then I read one adoptee book called Lucky Girl about a Taiwanese adoptee, which was really interesting and I found really helpful. There are a lot more adoptee memoirs out there that I'd highly recommend if adoptees are interested, as well as adoptive parents. I think it's very insightful. And then I did Mandarin tutoring once a week. So like my high school didn't offer Mandarin as a language, and I'm dyslexic, which is when I was little, learning Chinese was actually the only aspect of my culture that I was really interested in. And it was really tough because my god sister, who's 3 years older than me, got to learn Mandarin beginning in 5th grade, like 5th to 8th grade. She took Mandarin classes at the school she went to, but I'm dyslexic. And I've struggled with English. I struggle with reading and writing. Like I'm fine orally speaking and everything, but I struggled with reading and writing. And my mom was like, no, like we got to get one language down first and then we can think about it. So in high school, like I was fine and everything. I had lots of tutoring and everything. So I did Chinese, which was really great. Went to a tutor once a week. And my mom actually, she fully supports my cultural reclamation and everything I do. I mean, I say a lot of stuff about being an adoptee and everything, but it's not a reflection on my adoptive parent.
One of the things that you said to me very clearly early in our conversations is that you have a great relationship with your mom.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my mom she adopted me as a single parent. And like I've really just had her mostly, and we're really close. I mean, of course, we have, I think, a typical mother-daughter relationship in terms of like we get on each other's nerves and stuff and all of that, but we're close. And like I text her all the time. I text her daily, and we talk about everything. I get mostly everything.
When you were 15 and you first had this aha moment, I want to say, or this moment in the classroom, it sounds like that's when you really started to do the self-exploration and do the reclamation and start the Mandarin classes.
It took a whole year. Because I went to a deep depression, but no one knew. For a whole year, I had depression and suicidal ideation from everyone. I learned how to pretend I was happy, or I learned how to be numb. And so I didn't tell my mom, and she didn't know how depressed I was until about a year later. We got into an argument over something real stupid. And I just broke down and I told her that like I didn't want to be here. And then she got really worried and then like took me to a shrink and a psychiatrist and like sought out all the resources. Like my mom's great at that. If she doesn't have the resources within herself to support me fully, then she'll seek outside help. But yeah, it was really difficult because I didn't know how to process any of that.
Yeah.
And then there's such a fear that many adoptees have is like hurting our adoptive parents. So it was really hard for me to tell my mom at 16 that I wanted to find my birth family.
Do you think that fear of hurting your parent is more poignant for an adoptee? Do you think it's resident more, or do you think everyone's sort of afraid of hurting a family member?
I think it's a different dynamic when you're adopted. So I think like yes, everyone is afraid of hurting their parent. When you're adopted, these are your second parents. And like I'm very aware, like my mom never told me or never made me feel like I owed her or that she saved me. But I am very much aware of my adoptive circumstances. My mom's been very transparent about the adoption process, about when she went to China, about like how I was as a baby. So knowing that, and then knowing that the way society perceives my mom having adopted from another country. So like, thankfully, my mom never took the praise when people would be like, you're so amazing for having adopted from China or like from an orphanage, like that kind of thing. The savior narrative. Thankfully, my mom never did that, but I was conditioned by society and by just knowing my adoption story to know that saying anything like wanting to find my biological parents would inadvertently hurt my mom because she would take it as she isn't enough. So when I eventually told her, I framed it in a way that she knew that my wanting to find them had nothing to do with my love for her, which was really important for me to tell her up front. And thankfully she got it, and it brought us closer because she fully supported that.
Wow, she sounds incredible. You know, in her love and support for you, not in a savior narrative way.
She's a great, like, I don't want people to pressure me to praise my mom, but if I want to praise my mom, I will. And I have a great mom. And I think, I don't use the word lucky, but I think I'm very fortunate to have ended up with an adoptive parent who is willing to go above and beyond in terms of supporting that aspect of me being an adoptee, because there are adoptees who do not have that in their adoptive parents, who actually hide family reunion from their adoptive parents or hide searching. It's very complicated, and adoptees are like in the middle. So we balance both the pain and whatever from our biological parents. So like I feel pain for my biological family for having given me up. I also feel pain for like my adoptive mom when my wanting to search, or if I say something negative about adoption, how that hurts her. And it's like, where is the space for me to feel everything? So we're hyper aware of how other people are feeling, and we're not given space to feel how we feel. So like if an adoptee expresses to a friend or a family member or whatever that their birth parent's searching, the first thing they'll ask is, what do your adoptive parents think? Not, how are you doing? I know this must be emotionally difficult for you. How are you doing?
Yeah.
It's always, how are the parents doing? Either the biological ones or the adoptive ones, in terms of whether or not you're in reunion.
And I'm struck as somebody who's just getting to hear your story now. And so total outsider, having never had any of the experiences that you share, but I'm imagining you at 15 feeling incredibly depressed, going through an identity crisis, and then in the moment of the depth of your depression, paying attention to somebody else's feelings, paying attention to how you frame and construct the conversation with your mom about finding your biological parents. And that makes me really sad for you, frankly.
Yeah. It was really sad, like, not gonna lie. And I mean, I still struggle with mental health to this day, but that year was really tough. And high school was tough in terms of the adoptee aspect, because that's when it really first hit.
How did you pull yourself out of that depression? How did you climb from this deep, painful moment to where you are now, where you're very composed externally and very poised and very thoughtful and kind? At least those are the things I'm seeing in front of me in this interview.
I think I have my good days and bad days, and good moments and bad moments. I don't think the depression or the suicidal ideation ever went away. Honestly, sometimes I have to push aside my feelings about like my birth family or thinking about them. So distraction is something that I have found to help mitigate like being in a constant depression, finding support within the community of adoptees. So I've been working I've been involved in the Chinese adoptee community for almost 10 years now, but more recently I've been involved with the broader adoptee community, which has been very interesting hearing their perspectives outside of like the Chinese adoptee perspective. And
Are
that's
you
been
finding
really
points of
fascinating.
similarity or points of differences between?
Both. And it's actually, I personally find it a lot easier. So domestic adoptees, when I hear their stories, it's easier for me to digest, especially when it comes to reunion and seeing their biological parents. Like I have a new adoptee friend that I made this summer through social media. She's wonderful, and she's been in reunion for a couple of years. And over the course of National Adoption Awareness Month, she was posting a couple of photos of her birth mom and then her. And it was so interesting to see the similarities. And that's something I can see, but I can't see a Chinese adoptee who has found their biological parent in a picture of them, or even an Asian adoptee. Sometimes even a transnational adoptee, if it's like an adoptee from South America who found their biological family.
And you say you can't see it because it's too emotionally difficult?
Yes. Because searching for your biological family outside of the domestic space is incredibly difficult. Like, I have someone else's records. I've done extensive searching. I've been on national television in China. I've been in local TV, newspapers, everything. I've done multiple DNA tests. I thought I was in reunion for 4 months. Back in 2010, I found a family, brought their sample to the US, and it was just a maternity test. Came back positive. I was in reunion for 4 months. Texted with the family daily, told them I loved them. They told me they loved me. Was planning to go to China that summer. Got a text from the dad over spring break. I was with a friend, and that's why I remember. And he mentioned a birth date, and it would have been impossible for me to be their child because the birth date was after my mom adopted me. So we got really confused. And my mom contacted the DNA company. And then at the end of March, got an email saying they effed up and they sent me someone else's results. Oh. It was devastating. It was honestly the worst day of my life. And then
what did you feel in that moment when you had this reunion and then it slipped away from you?
I felt like I was dying. And like, I don't think I've 100% processed everything that happened, because on November 11th, 2010 was when I got the email from my mom during school. I was in the orchestra room that I had found my family. I was over the moon. I thought I had done the impossible. And then that spring, learning that it wasn't them and that I lost what I thought I'd found was devastating. And then that summer I did searching again, and then I found a family that matched my records. There was some translation stuff. I still don't know what happened with that first family because we hired a searcher. We hired a different searcher. And then I was in China this time searching and found a family that matched everything in terms of my orphanage records, like finding note, like where the baby was left, everything, birth date. And we met the family, and like we had a huge camera crew with us. And they filmed this whole reunion. We pulled up to the aunt's house and we saw the mom. And my mom's first thought was, I really hope that's not the mom.
Ooh,
my
why?
first thought was because she did not look like me. And then I saw her and I was like, and I just knew deep inside that she wasn't my mom. I didn't look like any of them. And so like what I will say is when I look at reunion photos of like Chinese adoptees who found their families, the siblings look alike. You don't necessarily look identical, of course, to the parents, but the siblings, I've seen adoptees, and like one of my close friends found her first family and she looks identical to her sister, her biological sister. So we saw the family and they're filming this whole reunion, and it was very emotional. Everyone was crying. I was telling the mom what I wanted to tell my birth parents, and that I didn't blame them and that I love them. And like we had a big meal with it. Like we went out and we celebrated. Like everyone was telling me this was my parent. So we went out and we ate. Wow. And then when we got back to the hotel, I told my mom, I was like, they're not my parents. And like,
and you
I
just
know
had this like intuitive sense.
I look nothing like them. I can show you a photo later. I look nothing like them. Mm-hmm. And we did a DNA test with them. And came back, of course, negative. And then the following year, I went back to do more on the ground searching. And they came back and wanted to do another DNA test. So I drove with them from my hometown to Nanjing. And that was like a 45-minute drive to an hour, and just sat in the car in between the two of them in the back seat.
So
got
you're
a blood
sitting
test.
between two people who believe that they're your parents, and you feel this intuitive sense that they're not your parents, and you're
And we'd
sitting
already
there.
done a DNA test. So they knew, but they wanted another confirmation that I wasn't their daughter. And that was just, I knew it was going to come back negative again, but they wanted to do another test. And I knew that they needed closure.
What
But I
was running
feel,
through your head as you're sitting in between these two strangers who are not the people that you want them to be?
I don't remember. I blocked out a lot
Yeah.
because of how painful it was. And I haven't really, it's really hard to process searching when you're searching. I probably should have kept a diary, but I didn't. I'm not a diary person, but I probably should have.
Let me ask you this. The searching
Yeah.
process sounds, if this is not a fair parallel, so I apologize, but
It's
sometimes
okay.
you want something really bad in life. Those moments where the carrot's in front of you and then it gets yanked away from you so many times, you know, this possibility that this might be your family or this possibility that you might get this thing that you want. The ups and downs of that emotional experience can be so brutal, so painful. How did you have the emotional resilience to continue going through the searching process? What was driving you?
So, what drives me to search is the fact that one, I want an actual relationship. So, I don't search because I just want to know who I look like. I mean, like, that is a valid reason. So, like, every adoptee has a valid reason why they want to search if they search. But my reasoning is I want an actual relationship. And I know that is very idealistic and that's not really what is likely to happen because reunion is another chapter. I can't make up for the time and the childhood that I didn't have with my biological parents. But I want the next best thing, which is being able to go see them, travel back to China, visit with them, have a relationship with my siblings, have a relationship with any extended family members that will have me.
Yeah.
And if and when I have kids, I want to be able to take them back to China so they can know their biological grandparents and their biological cousins, aunts, or uncles, and be connected to China in the way I wasn't.
Sounds like a beautiful vision, frankly.
Yeah, very hard vision to get there in
Yeah.
terms of searching.
So
It's
this
an
is what you're
uphill
holding
battle.
on to as you're searching. This is this hope
But
that there might be these people who will enter your lives and help be part of your life going forward.
that, and there is so much pain in knowing that I may die and never know them, which honestly kills me. And like, I can't sit and marinate on that thought for a long period of time because dying without knowing them means I will have died alone.
Wow, there's a power in that statement. You know, it presupposes that the other people in your life, the chosen family that you've identified at the beginning of this interview, don't qualify as being community enough.
So I wouldn't say that. You're fine in what you're saying, but I think the way to frame it is the fact that my adoptive family was never meant to replace my biological one.
That's a
And
great
they
point. Yeah.
right, and they never will. I absolutely adore my adoptive family and all of them have provided me with so much love and support. So, yeah, I think even in having biological children and even in having an incredibly loving and adoptive family, that loss and that never knowing, like that can't be filled by other people.
I get that. I get that this is this void or this hole that has to be filled by a specific set of circumstances, and that the other things are additive, not subtractive to it.
Right. In my adoptive circumstances, there is not a net positive or a net negative. Like one doesn't outweigh the other. It is a mixed bag of like pain, trauma, and then beauty, and the fact that I am fortunate to have been adopted by a wonderful mom and thereby have a wonderful extended family.
I really appreciate that you can hold the both and of your life, you know, to hold the good and the bad and the challenging and the difficult and the beautiful simultaneously and say this is it. This is what I got.
Well, another adoptee said this, which I thought was spot on, is that they get to decide what is beautiful in their adoption because there is a lot of messed up things in terms of the system of adoption, the secrecy, the lies, the classism, the racism, the white supremacy, the ableism, the heteronormativity, and like all of that stuff. And the business, like people forget the industry of adoption that is driving the commodification of children. But she said that she gets to find the beauty within her adoption in like which aspects she thinks are beautiful and which aren't, because a lot of it is not.
And in your case, if I were that friend posing that as a question to you, what are the beautiful parts of your adoption and what are the less beautiful parts?
The beautiful part would be that I do have a great mom and that she's so supportive of me. So that is one of probably the most important thing. Like, obviously, I don't know life any other way. So she is my mom, but I have two moms. So I have my birth mom and then I have my adoptive mom. And I just use those clarifying terms just so people know, but they're both my moms. And then the not so beautiful part is the relinquishment trauma, the loss of culture, the loss of a life that I did not get to have, the struggles that I face having grown up in America that I didn't recognize until I got older and had the language to process it, to be able to understand what I've always felt, those struggles. To be an Asian woman in America, to be a transracial adoptee, and to have to navigate that difficult aspect of my life.
Yeah.
So that's like the not so beautiful part.
It's a really important statement you just made. And as somebody who is very active in the adoption community, specifically in the Chinese adoption community, do you have some thoughts on adoption? If somebody were to walk away from this interview and say, okay, I've learned this one thing about the adoptive experience, is there something you want others to listen and hear?
Yeah. So, adoptees are not a monolith is one key thing. When an adoptee shares their truth, their pain, their anger, it's not always a reflection on the adoptive parent. So don't be super sensitive about that. Understand that adoption is an industry. People make money off of the commodification of children. There is a lot of injustice in the system of adoption. The only people that have real choices and have power in the adoption triad, which really isn't a triad, is the adoptive parents. I prefer adoption constellation, which I heard, which was really good.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. I know if I had been raised by my biological family, I would have been really poor. I would have had a tough life, but I would have them and I wouldn't have this loss that is so visceral and impacts every aspect of my life. But yeah, in terms of power, the people that have power are the adoptive parents and the entire adoption industry. And definitely research adoption and specifically adoptees. Listen to adoptees, adult adoptees who may hold differing point of views in your understanding about adoption, because your adoptee, if you adopt, may feel the exact same way. You have to be able to hold space for those that hold differing opinions, because adoptees, when we grow up, we're very aware of our surroundings and what got us into being an adoptee versus a relationship with our adoptive parents. So one thing is, I was very clingy with my mom, and I don't even know if it was healthy for me to have bonded so easily with my adoptive mom, because I didn't really have a full-time caretaker before that. And so I bonded with the first person who showed me love and affection and attention. But that is something that is praised, because if you don't do that, then they diagnose a child with retroactive attachment disorder. And if an adoptee never bonds with their adoptive parent, then they're seen as a failure because they can't bond. But it's always seen as a failure on the adoptee's part if we can't fit the perfect narrative of being grateful for the new life we've been given and the opportunities, to being grateful and loving towards our adoptive parents. So if we show any kind of anger, animosity towards our adoptive circumstances, whether that's against our biological parents, our adoptive parents, or just the current situation we're in, then we're seen as ungrateful or angry. And it's you would be angry if you'd experienced family separation and been given a new family, and everyone assumes that, well, you have a new family now. You shouldn't be sad. It's I have a right to be sad about my first family, but also I choose to embrace and love my adoptive family. But that is not a requirement.
So you're really saying that as an adoptee, you're not given permission to feel your full range of emotions.
Right, because it's not linear, and the healing process is not linear, and it's really messy. And I just saw a recent meme, and it was just as kids, we always think of someone coming in to save us. and then realizing as an adult you're saving yourself.
Yeah.
Or some adoptees are like, I'm having to reparent myself as an adult, or having to cultivate and embrace my inner infant or inner child.
Yeah, it's disempowering to have a narrative that somebody else saves you, because it takes away the power of saving yourself, or not even rescuing yourself, but also just the power of being your own self-actualized, empowered human.
That too. And then I think the savior narrative assumes that biological parents, and if you're transracial or a transnational adoptee, your birth country or culture or those people are not as good as the white adoptive parents that you have, that like whiteness is better kind of thing. And it takes away the dignity of biological parents when there is a savior narrative, because it's not like they weren't good enough. Like my biological parents were good enough to have raised me. They were my parents. They just weren't allowed to keep me. And that was a mix of policy, patriarchy, and classism.
It's so powerful. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
I have two questions as we wrap up. The first is, if you were to go back to yourself as a young child and tell her something that you now know, having gone through this incredible adoptive journey, or this journey into self-discovery through reconnecting with your heritage, reconnecting with your culture, reconnecting with several non-biological parents that may or may not have been your biological parents, you know, these almost reunions. What would you want that child to know?
It's okay to be sad, because I didn't allow myself to be sad when I was little. Like when it came to my birth family, it's okay to think about them and be sad, or to be angry, or to have like a wide range of emotions, and your mom will hold space for you.
Done all the research and all the exploration and all the really the community service that you've done through your social media by communicating to the world about your adoptive experience, all that rolled up, how does that shape your definition of family?
Oh, that's hard.
I know.
I mean, I think there are like different types of family. Of course, there's biological families, there are adoptive families, there are chosen families. I guess I can only define like what my family is, which is a mix of all three. So like I personally consider my biological family to be my family. I also consider my adoptive family to be my family. And then I have people in my life with whom I love dearly who are my chosen family. I think that will evolve over time, and it'll expand in terms of the people that I bring into my life.
Yeah.
And claim as family. Yeah. But one thing that is really important is a lot of times when people talk about adoption, they're like, blood doesn't make a family. Please don't say that. It infuriates a lot of adoptees. And like, I think people say it because they want you to find comfort in like, we're capable of loving someone who is not biologically related to us, who is not blood. It's like, if you want to have a chosen family, I didn't consent to any of this. And I don't consent to being told that my biological family should not matter, because they matter so much to me. And they're so important to me that blood does make a family. So blood is important. And there are other ways to say that an adoptive parent is capable of loving someone who is not biologically related to them, instead of saying blood doesn't make a family.
How do you like to describe the love between you and your adoptive mother? What's a better terminology for that?
I don't know about a term, but I mean, she's just my mom. That's just about it, really. Like, I don't have a term for her. I just love her. And both she and my biological parents, both of my parents and my siblings, have my heart.
I like that. They have your heart. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wish I had asked about, or that you wish you had the space to share?
I just hope people, like, you listen to my story. I understand that it might be difficult for some people to hear, especially if you are either an adoptive parent or you are hoping to adopt.
Yeah.
Know that adoptees know we're not I think an important thing to know is we know we are not the first choice. Like, we know most people want to have biological children, and I don't fault people for that. Like, but we know that. Don't lie to us. Like, don't sugarcoat adoption for your comfort, because we are capable of swallowing those hard truth pills. And I'd rather hear the hard truth and be able to process that than to be lied to. And I think most adoptees feel that same way, is they don't want to be lied to. They don't want a sugar-coated whatever about their adoption. So just be willing to listen to adoptees, understand that this is not necessarily an attack on adoptive parents or hopeful adopters, but know that adoptees don't choose this. Yeah. We have a higher risk of attempting suicide, according to the American Association of Pediatrics. They did a study on it. So we're 4 times as likely to attempt suicide. And know that you are not meant to replace biological parents. Like, no amount of attempted erasure is going to make an adoptee feel better. It's like, please hold space for your adoptee to feel all that they're feeling. If they're young, get them into some kind of therapy so that they're able to express themselves and process their adoption. Please don't place that burden on a child to fill your infertility needs or your just desire to parent need, because we're not filler children. We're human beings. We grow up, we become adults, and there is generational trauma in adoption. Now I, as an adult, have to worry about me being a parent to at least half Chinese kids and what that means for them, and maybe never knowing who their grandparents are or struggling with race and culture the way I struggled.
Oh, it's a lot of heavy stuff that you have been brave enough to tackle with us today. And I want to thank you for that. And I also want to thank you for your very honest reflection around what a prospective adoptive parent might consider, because that's frankly where our conversation started, is a reaction you had to a comment I made in episode 1 about potentially exploring adoption myself. And I think it's really important to not to center this on my experience or a parent's experience, but you have some really important feedback and insights. And I think it's wonderful to hear those. So thank you for sharing them.
Thanks for listening. I really do appreciate that. And I know it's a hard thing to hear for prospective adoptive parents, because adoption is always there in the background when you know that you can't have biological children, or your situation changes and you're a single parent and still want kids. It's not easy to listen to, but I do appreciate anyone who is listening to this.
On a human level too, it's not easy to listen to this, because I'm hearing all of the pain that you went through, and I'm hearing this very complicated journey, and it's hard not to reach through the screen and give you a big hug. Not that I know you well enough to do that, but these are tough stories, and it's really important that you're brave enough to share it with us. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you again.
I mentioned several times that you are very active in the adoptive community and sometimes post things on social media. If somebody wanted to find and follow you and learn more, where can they find you?
So my personal social media, you can just find me on Instagram at Lane, LANE _XUE. I'm not going to pronounce my Chinese name. It's going to be too hard. I also have an organization that I co-founded back in 2011. So the link for the website is chinaschildreninternational.org. And then you can find us at social media, primarily Instagram, but we do have Twitter, at CCI_adoptees.
And while we have you, what does that organization do?
Yeah, so we are one of the first organizations by and for Chinese adoptees. Our organization was founded back in 2011 by me and another Chinese adoptee who was actually successful in their birth parent search. So I was 17 when I started it, and so was the other adoptee. And we are a network for Chinese adoptees. We have a variety of programs and projects where we support the Chinese adoptee community. We do have a main Facebook group that does have adoptive parents who are able to follow what is said. They're not allowed to comment. And we have a separate Facebook group just for adoptees, which is a more safe space.
Wow. Well, this sounds like a really special organization, and it sounds like you're doing a tremendous amount of work in the community to share these very important messages about the diverse experiences adoptees have. And so I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.